Of all the famous wrestling venues in the US, few have a more iconic look than the Hammerstein Ballroom. Every arena in the world tends to look similar after a while, but if a show has come from the Hammerstein, there's no mistaking it. The ballroom has hosted wrestling since 2000, and in that time, only 8 promotions have run it. In this video, we're going to take a look at the ballroom's history with pro wrestling, and as in my video about the 2300 arena, I'm going to focus on the ECW years, or year. In 2000, despite the company seeing better days financially, ECW toured all across the US, and even ran in Canada. Gone were the days of them only running in the ECW arena, and occasionally elsewhere for bigger shows. They even had multiple venues in New York, with some events coming from Elks Lodge in Queens, and others coming from the Manhattan Center. The same building as the Hammerstein, but in the Grand Ballroom, where a lot of the early episodes of Monday Night Raw came from. The first time ECW ever ran the Hammerstein was a 2-night event on August 25th and 26th, 2000, collectively known as Midtown Massacre. Parts from these events would air as episodes of Hardcore TV and ECW on TNN from the 1st to 15th of September. Altogether, 5 episodes of television came from these 2 events. As early as July, the shows were being reported as tentatively happening according to the Wrestling Observer. In the July 3rd, 2000 issue, Dave Meltzer reported that a tag team tournament was being planned for one of the shows. This would be for the vacant ECW tag team titles, as Just Incredible forfeited his belt when he became ECW World Champion, with his partner Lance Storm also seemed to be leaving for WCW. Interestingly, in the same issue, Dave noted that the ECW arena had a full lease sign out front. The plans were confirmed a month later in the August 14th issue, along with scheduled participants for the tournament and a plan for the 3 title matches to happen on night 2. On the first of the TV episodes, which aired on TNN on September 1st, they begin the build to the world title match that would air in 2 weeks. The challenger, Steve Corino, would come through the crowd along with Billy Corgan of the of the Smashing Pumpkins. This Steve Corino is a far cry away from the one that would confront Limp Bizkit on stage and take a beating at one of their concerts in the previous year. To find out more about that change, I have a video on this channel about his entire feud with Dusty Rhodes. Billy Corgan would actually get physically involved too, attacking Just Incredible with his own cane, but he would get hit from behind by the network's consultant, Louis Dangerously. The rest of the episode would feature semi-final matches of the tag team tournament, including Jerry Lynn pinning ECW World Champion Just Incredible, which would foreshadow Jerry Lynn beating Justin for the world title at the next pay-per-view, Anarchy Rules, in October. The main event of the show would feature the tournament finals, in which the Unholy Alliance, featuring ECW mainstay Mikey Whipwreck and Yoshihiro Tajiri, would beat Simon Diamond and Johnny Swinger, as well as Tommy Dreamer and Jerry Lynn to win the titles. Simon and Swinger would use the Problem Solver to eliminate Dreamer, leading to Mikey pinning Simon Diamond to claim the titles. The locker room would hold Mikey and Tajiri up, and treat this like a big moment. ECW Hardcore TV, airing on September 2nd, opened with an in-ring confrontation between the voice of ECW Joey Styles and Cyrus, the evil representative of TNN, who ECW had a rocky relationship with, to say the least. Cyrus is known to modern AEW fans as Don Callis. Here he would shove Joey Styles to the ground, but Joey, just like he fought back against JBL back in the day, chased Callis out of the Hammerstein. On the rest of the episode, they would air matches from the tag tournament they had already aired the finals of on the previous night on TNN. One significant thing though, is that in the main event they aired Jerry Lynn pinning Rob Van Dam, meaning that he pinned the ECW World Champion and his most famous rival in the same night. On the second TNN episode, which aired on September 8th, it would begin with a major angle that took place on night 2 of the tapings. Cyrus would come out to interrupt the introduction of the show by Joey Styles and colour commentator Joel Gertner, and he would cancel ECW on TNN. While he does this, the ECW fans loudly chant USA. While at first I assumed they were heckling the Canadian Cyrus, writing of this angle in The Observer, Dave would note that the feeling in the company seemed very positive regarding securing a cable outlet after the TNN cancellation, with the final show on September 22nd. Most of the talk revolves around a 2-hour late Saturday night time slot on USA Network, although no deal has been finalised at press time, and a favourable ruling by the Court of Appeals could be unfavourable for ECW. It should be noted that Raw at the time was leaving the USA Network and was set to move to TNN on September 25, 2000, just days after ECW was set to go off the air. This was just one of the many things that caused bad blood between them and ECW, who would not get another major TV deal with any channel. The angle ends in spectacular fashion as Cyrus claims that a New Yorker couldn't stand up to him, leading Paul Heyman himself to come out and crack him on the back of the head with a cell phone, much like he used to do as Paul E. Dangerously in WCW. This brings Rhino out, who gores the owner of the company through a table. It then looked like a fan was trying to get at Rhino, as police swarm into the ring. I have no idea how real this is though, as Rhino then gored a police officer. The locker room then empties, and a wild brawl takes over. Kid Cash then makes his entrance, and body surfs over the crowd of wrestlers, and the television title match between he and Rhino begins. Just when it looked like the ring was clearing and the match might actually happen, the Sandman's music hits. Sandman hits Rhino with multiple cane shots, but Rhino gores him too. Kid Cash does an amazing springboard dive onto all the wrestlers brawling, and we get back to him and Rhino, who gores Cash. It's still not over though, as Rob Van Dam comes out next. RVD hits a Van Daminator, then with the help of his manager Bill Alfonso, hits the Van Terminator into a chair. That's the move Shane McMahon nicked and called the Coast to Coast. He and Cash do stereo dives onto Rhino, and an official comes in to count 3, and crown Kid Cash the new television champion. All of this madness happened in one flowing segment, and it was just the intro to the show. In the main event, Mikey Whipwreck and Tajiri's tag title reign would last just one day, and would be over before it even aired on TV. Taped on night 2, the full-blooded Italians, Little Guido and Tony Mamaluke, would take the titles off the Unholy Alliance, though this would air on September 8th, so the reign-in storyline would last a week. Show 4 from the Hammerstein would be the September 9th episode of Hardcore TV. This show mainly acts as a recap for the highlights of the previous episodes, and they would replay the entire wild segment from TNN the night before. Joey Styles repeatedly refers to it as 14 minutes that changed the course of ECW history. In the main event of this one, Rob Van Dam would defeat Scotty Anton, whose gimmick is that he would give you the clap. I'm not kidding. This was a rematch from the recent Heatwave pay-per-view. Rather hilariously, Anton attacks and powerbombs Bill Alfonso before the bell, which Van Dam doesn't even notice because he's too busy posing still. This makes for a different match, as Alfonso had grown to be a big part of RVD's act in ECW, routinely throwing chairs in on request, and being annoying as hell with his whistle. Van Dam would beat Scotty Anton, and post-match would get gored by Rhino, ahead of their upcoming match at Anarchy Rules. On the 5th and final episode to come from the Hammerstein, the September 15th ECW on TNN, Steve Corino would finally get his ECW World Title match against Just Incredible. On the night of the tapings, this actually happened third from the top, followed by RVD vs Anton, with the tape main event being the 14 minutes that changed history, with Kid Cash winning to end on a high note. As best I can tell, the only match that didn't air on TV at all, either in highlight form or the full match, was Psychosis vs Tony DeVito, which was described in The Observer as said to be an atrocious styles clash that will obviously never see television. On the September 15th show, they start with a recap of the 14-minute segment. Then a match airs from earlier in the tag tournament, with the Unholy Alliance defeating Julio De Niro and Easy Money. The rest of the show, for more than half of the hour, is dedicated to the Credible vs Corino match, which features run-ins from Francine and the returning Dawn Marie, who'd had less to do since Lance Storm left, and the match ends with Justin retaining his title. The show and run of tapings comes to a close, with Styles and Gertner plugging Anarchy Rules, where Jerry Lynn would challenge and defeat Just Incredible for the world title in his hometown. Prior to the events, in The Observer, Dave would note that the shows were expected to sell out at approximately 2,500 fans per night. This, according to many sources, is the capacity for wrestling in the ballroom, though GCW would claim to have broken the attendance record in 2022 reporting 2,025 fans. To be clear, I'm not claiming that GCW didn't sell out the ballroom, but all of the reporting from the time claims a larger number than they did in 2022. I know what you might be thinking though. Paul Heyman, by all accounts, didn't have the best track record with the truth back then, but Ring of Honor also claimed 2,300 for their debut show in the ballroom in 2008. In the following week's issue, Dave would claim that the shows were a complete triumph. In what was described as the greatest weekend in the history of ECW, the promotion put on what was reported as two of the best shows in history at the Hammerstein Ballroom in Manhattan on 8/25 and 8/26 to sell out crowds of 2,500 each night, and even got front page colour photo coverage the first day and a follow-up article after the first show in the New York Daily News. Dave's final note on the weekend is that there were already plans to return to the Hammerstein. The feeling is that the Hammerstein Centre is almost the perfect building for ECW because of the look, the location and the crowd reactions, and will likely host a pay-per-view at some point in the next year. The next time ECW would run the Hammerstein would be December 3rd, 2000, for the event called Massacre on 34th Street. This would end up being the company's penultimate pay-per-view. In the September 18th edition of The Observer, Dave Meltzer would report that the long-talked-about plan of moving from bi-monthly pay-per-views to going monthly appears to be on the books, as they're doing 10/1 in St. Paul, 11/5 in Villa Park, Illinois, and 12/3 at the Hammerstein Ballroom in Manhattan. The October and November dates he listed would be the annual Anarchy Rules, moved from September, and November to Remember events, and the December pay-per-view would be added to the schedule. By the time we would get to December though, it was clear that ECW was in trouble. In the December 4th Observer, Dave would report that the house shows scheduled for 12/8 and 12/9 in Dallas and Houston were cancelled. On the pay-per-view, which despite being near the end of ECW would draw over 2,000 fans, the tag titles would change hands again, as Danny Doring and Roadkill would defeat the FBI. Doring and Roadkill would hold on to the titles right to the end of the company, making them the last ever ECW Tag Team Champions. In the other two title matches, first Rhino would retain the TV title against Spike Dudley, which Rhino would win by choking Spike out. In the main event, Steve Corino would retain the ECW World title against Just Incredible and Jerry Lynn. Moments after Corino wins the match, the Sandman's music plays, and he attacks Corino, stealing the ECW World title belt. While he would leave with the belt on this night, he would win it officially the next time ECW was at the Hammerstein, but would he be able to hold on to it? As well as the pay-per-view, the pre-main show matches would air on the December 17th Hardcore TV, featuring the Extreme official HC Loc defeating evil referee Danny Daniels, and New Jack beating Angel, both in short matches. The December 11th Observer leads with an overall positive review of the pay-per-view, although not ignoring the other problems ECW had at the time. Amidst rumours of the company being down for the count, Extreme Championship Wrestling put on a strong pay-per-view on 12/3, but more importantly, everyone was paid for one pay period, meaning everyone is now 5 weeks behind in pay. Nobody quit the promotion, which some had talked about doing if they weren't paid again. Dave also noted that Paul Heyman told the talent that night he was looking to make the Hammerstein their home base, presumably with the ECW arena up for lease as noted earlier. And he had 2 upcoming shows that were paid for by local promoters in Missouri and Arkansas. The latter from the Pine Bluff Convention Center would end up being the final ever ECW show. By this time, ECW looked like it might not be long for the world. The Observer throughout the entire time frame I've talked about in this video constantly refers to wrestlers not getting paid this week or that, although Okada's not being booked to save money. By the time of Massacre on 34th Street, shows were getting cancelled and less were coming up. In the December 4th issue, Dave notes that with barely any shows booked for December, there is a pay-per-view on the schedule for 1/7, but there's no building booked and no new house shows are on the schedule. This January show would be the Guilty as Charged pay-per-view, which would also be held at the Hammerstein, their last pay-per-view. In the January 8th newsletter, it's confirmed that Guilty as Charged would take place at the Hammerstein, as well as the full card. Dave also notes that there are big plans for Rhino at the pay-per-view, and that he was set to be positioned as a top star in the company moving forward. It feels worth saying here that if you saw Rhino before he went to WWE, you've seen a very different Rhino. An unstoppable monster, similar to what Brock Lesnar would become in WWE a couple of years later. I know that might sound like an odd comparison, but trust me, part of this might be because Rhino was under 6 feet tall, and dwarf wrestlers like Spike Dudley, but didn't compare as favourable in WWE. Another former ECW World Champion, Mike Awesome, had a similar problem when he moved on to WCW, where he was immediately put into a feud with Kevin Nash, and therefore already looked smaller with his new opponents than in ECW. In the same issue, the Guilty as Charged pay-per-view would go ahead as planned from the Hammerstein, with another big crowd. However, the reception wouldn't be as favourable as the other shows. Guilty as Charged on 1/7, before a sellout crowd of 2,500 fans at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York, was the usual ECW show. It came across, with the exception of the return of Rob Van Dam, as more of a regular house show than anything special on pay-per-view. As Dave writes, RVD's surprise return in the main event was a big deal, mainly because he'd been writing about Van Dam holding out on appearing until he'd been paid money he was owed. The other major headline coming out of the show was, despite him not being part of the ECW World title match, Rhino would leave the night as the new, fresh World Champion, taking the title from the Sandman, which would keep their feud going. Sandman would win a tables, ladders and canes match, taking the title from Steve Corino, and also beating Just Incredible. But Rhino would attack afterwards, leading to a second title match, and Rhino leaving as champion. This had actually had a pretty long build to it, as Rhino had attacked and hospitalised Sandman's wife Laurie at Living Dangerously 2000, and pile-driven her through a table at Hardcore Heaven. Rhino threatened to go after his family again, if Sandman didn't agree to a title match despite not being physically able. A prone Sandman, lying on the mat, yelled, "Ring the bell!" and the short ECW World title match commenced. Clearly Paul Heyman had creative plans lined up that would sadly never pan out. Word coming out of the show from backstage wasn't good either. Wrestlers received half pay at the show, leaving them 7 weeks behind. The morale was said to be very bad, with the news getting around that despite claims to the contrary early in the week, the ECW had lost its TV on MSG in New York, its key market, and the show didn't even air the night before the pay-per-view in that market. The final Hardcore TV would air on December 31st, with more still in the can that never made it to TV, and the New York fans would have to wait 4.5 years to attend wrestling at the Hammerstein Ballroom again. The next time the Hammerstein Ballroom would feature in the Wrestling Observer would be in December 2004, when it would be discussed as a possible venue and Paul Heyman's pick for the next wrestling event to be held in the venue, ECW One Night Stand 2005. WWE, using the ECW branding, would promote the reunion show to massive success, so much that the brand would return to television in the following year too, to, let's say, mixed results. The final of these 3 shows, the ECW television taping on August 1st, 2006, is especially notorious, as it featured as its main event of all matches, Batista vs. The Big Show, to which the ECW fans would chant, "Change the channel" loudly. As you can probably imagine, WWE wasn't happy with the crowd that night at all, particularly the swearing chants, where WWE production turned the crowd audio super low, because Sci-Fi, the channel ECW was on, doesn't want that language on the air. The feeling was that the fanbase there is smart enough to know that, but still did the dirty language chants, not even caring. Dave also noted that this likely led to the upcoming December pay-per-view being moved from the Hammerstein to Chicago. This would end up being the ill-fated December to Dismember, which would be moved to the James Brown Center in Augusta, Georgia. Besides that, I doubt they'd have got the Elimination Chamber in the ballroom anyway. In 2008, Ring of Honor would begin promoting shows at the Hammerstein Ballroom with an event called A New Level. In that same year, they would also have 2 of their most important events on the calendar there, Death Before Dishonor 6 in August, and Final Battle in December. Ring of Honor would go on to hold 20 more events there over the years, with the 24th being the 2024 Final Battle event, the first there under Tony Khan's ownership. I always wondered why, given how Ring of Honor has ran many more events there, the venue is still so linked with ECW. I hope in this video I've managed to answer that question. Even in ECW's dying days, the few shows they had at the Hammerstein felt like successes. They felt like triumphant moments where otherwise their TV was getting cancelled, their wrestlers weren't getting paid, and other events were dropping out of the diary. To watch any ECW show from the Hammerstein, you wouldn't have known any of that, even the very last one, with a young fresh face taking the ECW World title from a veteran of the company. In time, I may come back and revisit more of the Hammerstein's history, but for now, those are the ECW years. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.